Hi, I'm Simon. I love to make things, and I've got my friend Chewbacca here. Chew's got a bit of a problem. Can't say anything at the moment, so we're going to fix that. This is my friend Stewie. Stewie is one of the founders of the East Midlands Garrison. That's the Star Wars costuming group that welcomed my wife Jane and I into their ranks back in 2018. The Garrison has really become a beloved family for us. We attend various events together, raising spirits and funds for the children's cancer charity PASIC. We have stormtroopers, Jedi, bounty hunters, rebels and heroes. And of course, we also have Stewie's friend, Chewbacca. Now, nothing is better than a warm welcome from a Wookiee. So when Stewie asked if I could help give Chewbacca a voice, I was only too happy to help. My plan was to build a set of handheld switches. These would connect to a control box strapped to Stewie's wrist. That box would then send audio up a single long cable running up Stewie's arm. This cable would lead to a chest-mounted amplified speaker. So, with just a press of the switch in his palm, Stewie could make our favourite Wookiee growl, howl or chuckle in his distinctive manner. First, the build needed minimal soldering, making any future replacements easy for Stewie to manage himself. Second, I needed an audio board with at least 8 inputs for custom sounds. Third, the activation required tactile momentary push buttons specifically built to withstand long-term usage. And finally, everything had to fit into a 3D printed enclosure that would strap comfortably and discreetly to Stewie's wrist. There were many tiny voice playback modules available, but almost all required soldered connections. So I specifically chose the DYHL30T voice module. While it's a bit larger, it features screw terminals that were crucial for this build. If one of Stewie's hand switches ever fails, he can replace it himself without needing a soldering iron. I also picked up a whole bunch of pre-wired self-contained momentary push-button switches. These are tactile and built to last. Because this voice module works by connecting a switch to ground to trigger its corresponding sound effect, I also sourced a grounding bar. This bar is packed with screw terminals, making it easy to connect all the switches that common ground. So my first task was connecting one lead of each switch up to the voice module. The other leads were then connected to the grounding bar. This should have been a relatively easy task, but I confess I made it more difficult for myself than it needed to be. It had been months since I'd completed my interrogator droid build. On that project, I discovered how wire ferrules make securing wires into screw terminals so much more reliable than just relying upon bare wire. However, in the interim, I completely forgot how to properly crimp those ferrules, so please forgive me in the early part of this video. I later figure out how to do that and fix everything in the final assembly. With all the switches connected, I then wired in a 9-volt battery connector. After that, I added a long cable with a female jack socket on the end. This would allow me to hook up the chest-mounted speaker. Then it was simply a matter of inserting a micro SD card with some choice Wookiee sound effects into the board. Next, attaching a battery, and finally connecting up a speaker. This was to do the first proof of concept test. Success! Now, time for a little housekeeping. This involved labelling each of the switches, next adding in a dedicated power switch, and then adding a square of industrial Velcro to the bottom of each switch. This would allow them to be easily held in place in Stewie's hand. So if you're enjoying the build so far, like the video, drop me a Wookiee roar in the comments and subscribe for more videos like this. Anyways, that's enough from me. We're about to get into the 3D printed parts. So, with all of that done, it was time to head over to the 3D printer. I needed to create a prototype mounting plate. This would be the quickest way to allow me to judge how the electronics would mount, how big a hole I'd need to pass the switch wires through to the hand, and where to position the battery and power switch. As expected, it was far too big. Stewie's a bigger chap than me, but this was going to be completely impractical for his wrist. Time for a second iteration. So, instead of using that bulky grounding bar, I decided to make a more tightly packed custom circuit board of my own. This involved a bit of soldering, and then hot glue to insulate everything on the inside of the board, and finally a whole bunch of new leads, this time with properly crimped connectors. It wasn't too long before I had everything back together, albeit in a bit of a tangle. For the second test, I secured the switches to a piece of cardboard with some Velcro to metal wrangle the cables. Satisfied, I then added some zip ties to the bundle of wires leading to the switches. These zip ties would provide crucial strain relief, making it far less likely that the switch could get pulled out of its connectors during use. Then it was time for revision 2 of the 3D printed wrist-mounted enclosure. This design was built upon everything I'd learned from the first quick prototype. It was much more like the shape I'd originally imagined. The enclosure was designed in 3 parts: a cover, the main body for the electronics, and a curved base to comfortably fit Stewie's arm. I then glued the base to the main body using 2-part epoxy. Next came the fiddly business of getting all the electronics inside the body. This involved lots of disconnecting, reconnecting and rerouting wires to ensure everything would fit in the smallest space possible. I did all I could to anchor components and minimise strain on wires. Once again, I used zip ties as strain relief, this time to make sure that the output cable couldn't be easily ripped from its connections. I must admit, wire wrangling is not exactly my favourite part of a project. It often feels more like controlling chaos than creating the beautifully organised symphonies that I see in some of my fellow droid builders' work. But if you're enjoying seeing it all together, I'd really appreciate it if you could hit that like button, subscribe, and let me know in the comments any tips you might have on how to mount electronics in a tidier manner. Anyway, I glued a small pad of EVA foam into the cover to cushion the battery, and a Velcro dot to the underside of a custom common ground board. This would secure it whilst making it easy to remove if I ever needed to fix in loose connections in future. To make the unit more comfortable to wear, I glued some EVA foam to its underside. A final test, and our Wookiee's voice was complete. I then spent a delightful afternoon with Stewie. We used elastic and Velcro to create a closure for the unit along with straps for Stewie's wrist. We also added an elastic loop with some Velcro strips on it. This allowed Stewie to comfortably position each of the switches on his palm, triggering sound effects like a guitar player selecting which notes to play. All in all, this was a very satisfying build, and it was a real pleasure to make something for my dear friend Stewie. And if you're watching this and thinking of starting your own project, just remember, you don't have to be an expert. Just a bit of imagination and willingness to learn is all you need to make something great. So, that's how we gave Chewie his voice back. What do you think, Chewie? Works for him. Thanks ever so much for watching, and see you again. Bye bye.